Hi, Tom. Hello. How is everyone? I hope you're good. I love you too, Tom. I am good. I am, my, my body is exhausted. After the stream, I decided to go to the gym because I spent some time on YouTube after, and it was entirely too much. And I knew I had to get out as quickly as possible. So I went to the gym and I did some stretching, and then I did a little bit of an elliptical. I like the elliptical. And then I did some arms and chest. And then there's this one piece of equipment at the gym, and it's a very simple piece of equipment. And I think the common name for it now is like hyperextension bench or something like that. I call it a Roman chair because I think that's what I was told it was once. Guardians of the Galaxy. It was great. It was great, Tom. It felt really good. And I just got out of the shower because I was like, on my body, you know how after you work out, and I think I went kind of hard. I think I overdid it. But it's that kind of good tired, you know, like the good tired. I thought he wanted the Walkman out of nostalgia because he would have had access to like music at any time, right? I think so. Wait, what's the matter, Tom? Can you hear me? Perhaps not. Oh yeah, no, I'm not. I'm in a t-shirt and sweatpants. So it's the least attractive post shower ever. But yeah, it was good. It was a good thing. It was a good thing. It was really good too. And then I walked home. It was really a nice afternoon. It was lucky, really lucky. So I walked home and that was great. And then what did I do? Oh, I had shrimp taco. That's how I spent my day. I cleaned my room. I had finished cleaning, so I tried to do that. I had a weight bench in my living room years ago after I got in the car accident. Oh yeah, I'm telling you right now. So they have this thing, and that extension bench or whatever it is, and I said I call it a Roman chair. And I love that fucking thing because it strengthens like your back and your ass. Like it focuses on that area, and it's such a simple piece of equipment. I've always loved that. I've always loved that piece of equipment. It's just so gracefully simple. When I was working on boats, I used to go to the gym every fucking day and take martial arts. I don't know why I did it after a full day of working on boats. Why in the world would I do that? That's probably addiction. That's probably what that is. Yeah, so I can tend to become a bit of a, I like to work out. I enjoy working out. Use your mountain bike. Oh, fun. Tom, I'm so excited to see what you've done. I'm so happy you're doing that. I think that's a great idea. Ooh, let's see if we can hear the waves. Hold on. Let me open a window. Oh, it's like little froggies. Can you hear the little froggies? Oh, this is nice. Let's stay here for a minute. Look at the moon on that water. I haven't ridden a bike. I have a good story though. Do you want me to tell you a good story about bikes, Tom? This is a funny one. I have been known to watch the Tour de France because I enjoy, first of all, the photography of the Tour de France is fucking amazing. I'm gonna turn them down a little bit. And so I love watching them, and I love bicycles. I love biking. I love all that. I'm not very good at it, but I love it. I used to do mini triathlons, but I was terrible at them. Oh my God. I was terrible. I came in last in the first one I did. I pretty much came in last in every one that I did. I didn't care. I didn't care at all. I just wanted to do it. And so anyway, I used to watch the Tour de France um, a lot, every year. And so one summer, it was just a really good tour. I don't even remember what year it was. It was a long time ago. It was a really good tour. And I was living in Northern California at the time. And so I reached out to Bob Roll, who, if you don't, he's one of the commentators and was a member of one of the teams back in the old days in the 80s. And, oh, good. Oh, excellent. I cannot. That's so cool. Um, so I don't know how I found his email, but Bob Roll's email was not hard to find. So I just emailed him and I said, listen, I just got to tell you, I thought that was an excellent tour. And I thought you guys, your commentary was fucking amazing. It was so fun to watch. Blah, 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 blah. And I thought, all right, well, I've done my good deed for the day. I've sent someone, a nice email and whatever. Anyway, I get an email back. And it basically kicked off like this little weird romance. Um, I actually ended up meeting him because I was in a wedding of a girlfriend in the wine country, and he was leading, like he does these like celebrity bike tours, you can pay to ride around the wine country with him or something. I don't know. Anyway, so he's like, hey, we should meet up. So we did. And then we kind of like long distance, whatever. I don't know. He led me on, I guess. No, I'm just kidding. Shut up. I did. I did. I did. I kissed him. Oh my God. I'm a crusher. I crush on people real bad. Yeah, he was a very nice man. Very nice. Very, very nice. But I pretty much knew there wasn't a big future there. I don't think that was, yeah. So Anyway, that's my brush with the Tour de France. There you go. It's the only one I got. That's all I got. It's the closest I'll get to the Tour de France. Anyway, yeah, I'm an almost was. I'm always an almost was, which is fine, I guess. It's what it is. Anyway, but that's neither here nor there. You didn't come here to hear about my love life. You came here to hear about democracy. I think that's admirable. I know there's no future. Yeah, exactly. But you always kind of hope in the back of your mind. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're like a more level-headed person. But you're always like, maybe I'm special to him. And you find out, nope, nope, which is fine. It happens. There are some serious bike people around here, but they all have attitudes. Well, I tend to find he didn't have an attitude, surprisingly. He's a very nice person, very easy to talk to, and had great stories, of course. But no, I can imagine. Yeah, the bike. I always hoped the bike people can be really fucking annoying. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think if you aren't actually riding on a team that has a chance of going to the Tour de France, then I don't know why you're wearing all that garb, okay? Because if you fall off that fucking bike, you're gonna get a road rash. Because that little, like, cellophane you got on your body, it ain't gonna do shit. Sorry. So, anyway. Can't look at you. Anyway. Welcome here. Wouldn't it be hilarious if Bob Roll found this and then was like, what the fuck is this person talking about? Of course they have the outfits. We call them Tour de France losers, my daughter and I. Anyway. Oh my goodness, yeah, very serious. Yes, oh my god, entirely too serious. But he wasn't. He was very refreshing. He's very sweet. Anyway, oh well. Love lost, whatever. So, here we go. Now, let's get down to real serious business. What I need you to do right now is take the deepest breath that you have taken all day long. And just let it come naturally. And then I want you to just forget about today. Just put away anything that happened that didn't work, that wasn't interesting, that wasn't what you wanted it to be. Just let it all go. You don't need it anymore. This day is done. It's time to look forward. It's a good idea. Show me that spot. So, I want you to sit back or lay back and just let your body sink. Feel an actual sinking sensation into where you're seated. Tonight, we're going to start with Chapter 4 of Democracy Awakening, which is the new book by Heather Cox Richardson, who is a historian, yes, an historian, and has a very colloquial and easy to understand presentation of historical events. And what this book is helping us hear about or be reminded of or learn for the first time is about how democracy has been challenged over the decades. And I think it works beautifully on prequel that we read recently that talked very specifically about the 30s and the 40s. This has a wider historical timeline and brings us up into today. So I will begin with chapter 4. Please note that there are many quotes in the book, and sometimes they contain words that are very hard to say, that are challenging ideas, that are bigoted, but they reflect what was said at the time, and it's important that we document where we came from. Chapter 4, Race and Taxes. From 1946 to 1964, this liberal consensus was so popular that its opponents were immortalized by Foghorn Leghorn, a ridiculous Looney Tunes rooster with a southern accent. By 1960, the consensus seemed so widely shared that political scientist Philip Converse advised political candidates to nail together coalitions based on promises of government spending. There was no longer any point in trying to attract voters with appeals to principled visions of American society, he wrote, because almost everyone was on board with the liberal consensus. But the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision exposed a crucial vulnerability in that consensus. The decision tied the active federal government not just to economic equality for white Americans, but also to civil rights. That link enabled opponents of the liberal consensus to resurrect a different American history, and the one that had been uppermost since World War II. And this one, constructed by former Confederates during the Reconstruction years, was based not in equality, but in a racial hierarchy. Those who had been trying to unwind the legislation enacted since FDR took office argued that the newly active federal government was misusing tax dollars taken from hardworking white men to promote civil rights for undeserving black people. The troops President Eisenhower sent to Little Rock Central High School in 1957, for example, didn't come cheap. The federal government's defense of civil rights redistributed wealth, they said, and so was virtually socialism. This argument had sharp teeth in the 1950s as Americans recoiled from the growing influence of the communist Soviet Union and the rise of communist China. But the American fear of socialism in the 1950s was not at all a product of its time. Instead, it resurrected a false history of the nation written by white supremacists after the Civil War. The use of the word socialism by those opposed to the liberal consensus had virtually nothing to do with actual international socialism, which developed in the late 19th century and burst into international prominence when the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia overthrew Tsar Nicholas II. International socialism is based on the ideas of mid-19th century political theorist Karl Marx, who believed that as the wealthy crushed the working class during late-stage capitalism, people would rise up to take control of the means of production, factories, farms, utilities, and so on. That theory has never been popular in America. While the U.S. had a few socialist mayors and even two avowed socialist congressmen, Wisconsin Victor Berger and New York's Meyer London, in the early 20th century, the best a Socialist Party candidate has ever done in a presidential election was when Eugene V. Debs won about 6% of the popular vote in 1912 with 900,000 votes. Even then, while Debs called himself a socialist, it is not clear he was advocating for the national takeover of industry so much as the calling for the government to work for the ordinary Americans rather than the very wealthy. In America, the use of the word socialism came long before the Bolshevik Revolution. In 1871, during the period of Reconstruction after the Civil War, white supremacist Southerners seized on a word that had been a general term for utopian communities and gave it a political definition that was specific to the United States. During the Civil War, Republicans in charge of the government had both created national taxation and abolished legal slavery, except as punishment for crime. For the first time in U.S. history, voting had a direct impact on people's pocketbooks, and the Democrats opposed to the Lincoln administration insisted that taxation would destroy white workers. Then, in 1867, Congress passed the Military Reconstruction Act, expanding state voting to include black men, and in 1870 protected that right with the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. White Southerners who hated the idea that black men could use the vote to protect themselves started to terrorize their black neighbors. Pretending to be the ghosts of dead Confederate soldiers, they dressed in white robes with hoods to cover their faces, and warned formerly enslaved people not to show up at the polls. But in 1870, Congress created the Department of Justice to enable the federal government to protect the right of black men to vote. President Ulysses S. Grant's Attorney General set out to destroy the Ku Klux Klan. The next year, in 1871, unreconstructed white Southerners began to argue that they objected to black rights not on racial grounds, which was now unconstitutional and ran the risk of jail time from a Department of Justice prosecution, but rather on economic grounds. They did not want black men voting, they said, because formerly enslaved people were poor and were voting for leaders who promised to build things like roads and hospitals. Most public investments could be paid for only with tax levies, and the only people in the South with property after the war were white. Thus, they said, black voting amounted to a redistribution of wealth from white men to black people who wanted something for nothing. Black voting was, one popular magazine insisted, socialism in South Carolina. Immediately after the war, those Republicans who had fought alongside black colleagues and those who saw black Americans as the only reliably loyal people in the South insisted that black Americans must be equal before the law. But the argument that poor workers were dangerous resonated with Northerners who had previously supported black rights as native-born Americans began to worry about a new wave of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. The newcomers, Italians, Poles, Catholics, Jews, people who wore the costumes of their homelands and spoke unfamiliar languages, seemed alien to older inhabitants of the northern cities, where many of them settled. Many upwardly mobile native-born Americans agreed that cutting poor people, in this case immigrants, out of the vote was a good idea. And so, with a growing distrust of poor voters who wanted public investment that would cost tax dollars, Republicans who had previously recognized the right to vote as crucial for black Americans to protect their interests began to look the other way as former Confederates kept their black neighbors from the polls. Black voting slowed, and then it stopped. Seeking a contrast to the government action they called socialism, Southern Democrats, after the Civil War celebrated the American cowboy, began to drive cattle from the border of Texas and Mexico north across to the plains to army posts and railheads in 1866. In their view, cowboys were real Americans who wanted nothing from the government but to be left alone. The Democratic press mythologized these cowboys as white men. In fact, a third of the cowboys were men of color who worked hard for a day's pay independent of the government. Although the government bought the cattle, funded the railroads, and fought indigenous Americans who pushed back against the railroads, all while fighting off warriors, Mexicans, and rustlers who were trying to stop them. That mythological cowboy caught the nation's imagination in the 1870s, when as the antithesis of what Southern Democrats insisted was government-backed socialism in the East. He lived on with Buffalo Bill and his Wild West show, and in literature and films that defined true Americans as independent men erasing the townspeople, building the communities the cowboys theoretically fought to protect. The cowboy would be an effective propagandist for those standing against the liberal consensus in the 1950s and 1960s. And they needed something that ordinary voters would find attractive, because in the years after World War II, those eager to tear down the liberal consensus were finding their ideas a difficult sell. In 1951, William F. Buckley Jr., an oil man's son fresh out of Yale, was so frustrated that voters kept choosing leaders who reinforced the principles of government regulation of the economy, provision of a social safety net, and promotion of infrastructure. The government was not at that point doing much to protect civil rights, that he took a stand against the Enlightenment principles on which the United States had been founded. Enlightenment thinkers had rejected leadership based on religion or birth, arguing instead that society moved forward when people made good choices after hearing arguments based on fact. But this Enlightenment idea must be replaced, Buckley argued, in God and Man at Yale, superstitions of academic freedom, because Americans kept choosing the liberal consensus, which, to his mind, was obviously wrong. He concluded that the nation's universities must stop using the fact-based arguments that he insisted led to secularism and collectivism, and instead teach the values of Christianity and individualism. This traditional ideology would create citizens who would vote against the orthodoxy of the liberal consensus, he said. Instead, they would create a new orthodoxy of religion and the ideology of free markets. Buckley and his brother-in-law, L. Brent Bozell Jr., inherited a strand of Catholic thought that divided the world into Christians and communists, the latter aided by Jews, according to the anti-Semites who embraced this theory, who were at war for control of the world. In their minds, the liberal consensus was operating on the evil side, and they laid out a plan to destroy it. In McCarthy and His Enemies, their 1954 book defending Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy for his attacks on alleged communists in government, Buckley and Bozell divided America into two groups. On one hand were the liberals, who they insisted were basically communists. They capitalized the word to make it look like the Chinese Communist Party, which was on everyone's mind after its 1949 takeover of China's government. This was not some limited group of conspirators. It was the vast majority of Americans, anyone, Republican or Democrat, who believed that the government should regulate business, protect social welfare, promote infrastructure, and protect civil rights, and who believed in fact-based argument. So it's William F. Buckley's fault, now we know. On the other hand were the very few people that Buckley and Bozell called conservatives, in an echo of the 1937 Conservative Manifesto. They wanted America to return to the world of the 1920s, to protect the ability of businessmen to run the economy as they see fit. According to Buckley's argument, businessmen could gain the support of religious traditionalists who were less interested in the deregulating business than they were in overturning the trend toward liberal values. Traditionalists thought that liberalism in government undermined religion by weakening traditional family structures and social hierarchies that put men in charge of their families, the same way that God oversaw the world. Thus, they believed, liberal consensus served evil. Government must stand firm behind what they called free enterprise, and religion. Those values were not negotiable. Buckley and Bozell acknowledged that they were trying to overturn the shared belief system that had stabilized the country, and that they were doing so on the basis of ideology. This was the opposite of true conservatism, which Edmund Burke had conceived to stand against ideologically based government, and readers at the time noted that the plan was, in fact, radical. It was a political movement, one that would come to be known as movement conservatism. Most Americans didn't buy it. They knew what businessmen would do to the economy unless they were checked. They had seen people homeless and hungry during the Depression. Americans scoffed at the idea that the New Deal system, which had managed to keep the country afloat during the 1930s and then bankroll World War II, was a bad idea. They looked around at their homes, at the candy-colored cars that they drove on the new interstate highways built under what was at the time the biggest public works project in U.S. history, and at their union-boosted paychecks in a nation with its highest gross domestic production ever, and dismissed the movement's conservatives as radical fringe. But the 1954 Brown v. Board decision resurrected the mythological cowboy, now backed by the extraordinary power of television, as a brilliant vehicle for movement conservatism. By 1959, there were 26 westerns on TV, and in 1 week of March 1959, 8 of the top shows were westerns. September of 1959 introduced viewers to Bonanza, the first television show filmed in color, which sprinted up the charts and went on to run for 14 seasons. Bonanza told the story of Ben Cartwright, a patriarch on a half-million-acre ranch, overseen by his 3 sons from different mothers, all of whom had died, leaving the hot-headed youngest, Little Joe, played by Michael Landon, motherless at age 4. Westerns like Bonanza showed a male world of hard-working cowboys protecting their land from evildoers. Cowboys didn't need help from their government. They made their own law with a gun. They even helped to keep order in nearby towns that had a government. Cowboy mythology quickly permeated politics on the right. In 1958, Republican Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona rocketed to prominence after he accused his party's standard-bearer, President Dwight Eisenhower, of embracing the siren song of socialism. Goldwater had come from a wealthy background after his family of storekeepers cashed in on the boom of federal money flowing to Arizona dam construction, but he presented himself to the media as a cowboy, telling stories of how his family had come to Arizona when there was no federal welfare system, no federally mandated employment insurance, no federal agency to monitor the purity of the air, the food we ate, or the water we drank, and how everything that was done, we did it ourselves. Goldwater opposed the Brown v. Board decision and Eisenhower's decision to use troops to desegregate Little Rock Central High School. In Goldwater, movement conservatism and the racist mythology of the post-Civil War years came together. Hoping to boost Goldwater for president in 1960, his supporters hired Bozell to write a position platform for him. Published as a book under Goldwater's name, it was titled The Conscience of a Conservative. Joining opposition to the federal defense of civil rights with movement conservative hatred of business regulation, it was more than a party platform. It was a general manifesto against the liberal consensus. Like the 1937 Conservative Manifesto, the conscience of a conservative defended state rights against federal power. It also denied the Supreme Court's ability to use the 14th Amendment to protect civil rights, or, for that matter, to use the Constitution's Commerce Clause to regulate business. But in 1960, unlike in 1937, those determined to destroy the liberal consensus had racism on their side. All right, that's the end of chapter 4. I'm going to take a little break and have some smooth. It's drink. So I'm going to turn up our little sweet little Rogers. this is an interesting part. Chapter 5. Nixon and the Southern Strategy. Democrats, too, were trying to figure out how to respond to the nation's shifting ground on race. Goldwater had declined to run for president in 1960, and Republicans turned instead to Eisenhower's vice president, Richard M. Nixon, who lost to Democrat John F. Kennedy. When Kennedy took office in January 1961, his powerful inaugural address called for Americans to rally for a new era, looking back to the Declaration of Independence by promising to bring freedom to the world. But careful observers noted that he didn't mention racial justice at home. Black veteran James Meredith of Mississippi was a careful observer. He was also firmly convinced that only a power struggle between the state and the federal government could make it possible for me or anyone else to successfully enroll and complete a course of study at a state university, he later recalled. So he vowed to test the resolve of the young president who talked so inspirationally about the torch being passed to a new generation of Americans whom Kennedy described as unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which the nation has always been committed. The day after Kennedy took office, Meredith started the process of applying to study at the whites-only University of Mississippi. Twice denied admission, Meredith began to work with Medgar Evers, the head of the NAACP in Mississippi, and with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. On May 31, 1961, Meredith sued for admission to the school. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit decided that Meredith had the right to enroll at Ole Miss in the fall 1962, putting Kennedy on the spot. He would have to pick between northern and urban Democrats who embraced the liberal consensus and southern white supremacists. His attorney general and brother, Robert F. Kennedy, told him the government had no choice. It must enforce the decision of the Supreme Court requiring racial desegregation. The Department of Justice ordered the school to register Meredith. Mississippi Governor Ross Barnett physically barred Meredith from registering. White supremacists rushed to the campus to, quote, rally to the cause of freedom, as one of their sympathizers, Major General Edwin Walker, said. They became increasingly violent, killing 2 men, wounding others, and destroying property. After close to a day of rioting, the military arrived and arrested 300 people, breaking the resistance. Meredith registered at Ole Miss on October 1st. His first class was on American history. Kennedy had put the muscle of the federal government behind desegregation, and movement conservatives promptly called him and his attorney general communists. Quote, the Castro brothers, a reference to the communist revolutionaries in Cuba, were at Ole Miss, a bumper sticker read. That conflation of black rights and communism stoked such anger in the southern right wing that Kennedy felt obliged to travel to Dallas, Texas, in November 1963 to mend some fences in the state Democratic Party. On the morning of November 22nd, the Dallas Morning News contained a flyer saying the president was wanted for treason and for betraying the Constitution and giving support and encouragement to the communist-inspired racial riots. Kennedy warned his wife, Jacqueline, that they were heading into nut country today. They were, and he paid with his life for that attempt to enforce the liberal consensus. When Meredith returned to Ole Miss for the second semester, he noted that he was doing so not as a black man, but on his own terms as an American citizen. Meanwhile, those protecting black rights ramped up their efforts to register voters and to organize communities to support political change in what became known as the Freedom Summer of 1964. Because only 6.7% of black Mississippians were registered, Mississippi became a focal point. Under Bob Moses, a New York City teacher who began voting work in Mississippi in 1961, volunteers set out to register voters. Just as they were getting underway, on June 21st, 3 voting rights workers disappeared near Philadelphia, Mississippi. They were James Chaney, 21, a black organizer from Mississippi; Michael Schwerner, 24, a white Jewish civil rights activist from New York who had sparked the wrath of the local Ku Klux Klan for organizing in Mississippi; and Andrew Goodman, 20, another New York City Jewish civil rights worker who had arrived in town just the day before, sending a postcard to his parents saying, "This is a wonderful town and the weather is fine." No one knew where they had gone, but no one, except for the white supremacists claiming the men had deliberately gone into hiding to create news, imagined it was anywhere good. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had stepped into the presidency after Kennedy's murder, and Attorney General Kennedy ordered the Federal Bureau of Investigation to find the missing registration workers. They failed to find these three at first, but their search turned up 8 murdered black men, at least 2 of whom had also been registering voters. As popular rage over the disappearances grew, Johnson pressured Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, in part to make it easier to register to vote. He signed the measure into law on July 2nd. I'm going to stop there for a moment for some commentary. I think this is why and there's no chuds listening, so I'm singing to the choir. But when I hear chuds dismiss, or even, people who would not think themselves chuds, when I hear them talk about not voting, or it doesn't matter, or whatever the complaint is, think about this. And I think that's a lot of fucking privilege to act like voting is irrelevant. I'm not saying it's perfect, but people died so people could vote. And I just don't think anyone should ever forget that. So that's my commentary. On July 16th, Goldwater struck against the government protection for black rights when he officially launched his 1964 run for the presidency. A little more than 3 weeks after Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman disappeared, and while they were still missing, Goldwater strode across the stage at the Republican National Convention to accept the nomination. He told delegates that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. Prominent South Carolina segregationist Senator Strom Thurmond, who had filibustered the 1957 Civil Rights Act, publicly backed Goldwater, and the votes of the delegates from South Carolina were the ones that put his nomination over the top. White delegates to the convention set a black delegate's coat on fire. Horrified by the turn in the Republican Party, Jackie Robinson, who had been the first black Major League Baseball player in generations and faced everything from physical abuse to death threats, later said, quote, "I now believe I know what it felt like to be a Jew in Hitler's Germany." On August 4th, missing bodies of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman were found buried in an earthen dam near Philadelphia, Mississippi. Ku Klux Klan members, at least one of whom was a law enforcement officer, had murdered them. Those defending the liberal consensus and the power of the federal government to enforce it saw themselves as directly challenging the power of the dangerous foghorn leghorns of the South. 3 weeks after the men were found, the Democrats nominated Lyndon B. Johnson for president, declaring, "America is one nation, one people. The welfare, progress, security, and survival of each of us reside in the common good and democracy. And democracy rests on the confidence that people can be trusted with freedom." They dismissed those who traffic in fear, hate, falsehood, and violence, and invited all Americans He believed that a narrow partisanship takes too small account of the size of our task to vote for Johnson. They did, by a landslide. Goldwater won only his own state of Arizona, and ominously 5 states of the Deep South: Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, which had not voted for a Republican since Reconstruction. In those states, white supremacists had kept black residents from registering to vote. After the election, Black Americans were determined to bring the voting rights provision of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to life. Voting rights activists who had been trying to register voters for years stepped up their efforts. In Selma, Alabama, Black Americans outnumbered white Americans among the 29,500 people who lived there. The city's voting rolls were 99% white. White law enforcement officers regularly harassed and arrested activists. And on February 18, 1965, local police, sheriff's deputies, and Alabama state troopers beat and shot an unarmed 26-year-old, Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was marching for voting rights at a demonstration in his hometown of Marion, Alabama, about 25 miles northwest of Selma. Jackson died 8 days later. Hoping to diffuse the community's anger, Black leaders in Selma planned a march. They would walk the 54 miles from Selma to the state capitol in Montgomery to draw attention to the murder and to voter suppression. On March 7, 1965, the marchers set out. As they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, named for a Confederate brigadier general, Grand Dragon of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan, and U.S. Senator who stood against black rights, state troopers and other law enforcement officers met the unarmed marchers with billy clubs, bullwhips, and tear gas. They fractured the skull of young activist John Lewis and beat voting rights leader Amelia Boynton unconscious. A newspaper photograph of the 54-year-old Boynton, seemingly dead in the arms of another marcher, illustrated the depravity of those determined to maintain the nation's racial hierarchy. Images of Bloody Sunday on the national news horrified the country. On March 15th, Johnson addressed a nationally televised joint session of Congress to ask for the passage of a National Voting Rights Act. Their cause must be our cause too, he said. All of us must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. We paused and then stared sternly ahead, and we shall overcome. 2 days later, he submitted to Congress proposed voting rights legislation, and on August 6 he signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He recalled the outrage of Selma when he said, "This right to vote is the basic right without which all others are meaningless. It gives people as individuals, control over their own destinies." The Voting Rights Act authorized federal supervision of voter registration in districts where Black Americans were historically underrepresented. Johnson vowed to uphold the law. The Democrats' swing behind black voting orphaned the Southern white supremacists like Thurman who had organized as the Dixiecrats in 1948 and backed Goldwater in 1964. After the Voting Rights Act passed, most extreme among them organized their own political party behind Alabama Governor George Wallace, who in 1963 had called for segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. But others from the old solid South were open to switching parties, and when he ran for president in 1968, Republican candidate Richard M. Nixon recognized that he needed to win some of those disaffected Democrats in order to have a fighting chance. Embracing what later became known as the Southern Strategy, Nixon traveled to South Carolina personally to ask Thurman to make his switch to the Republican Party permanent. In exchange, he promised to stop using the federal government to enforce desegregation in the states, and to look the other way as Southern whites established segregation academies, which were so successful that in 1974, 3,500 academies in the South enrolled 750,000 white children. As white students left the public schools, funds followed them. Schools educating the remaining students, mostly black, but including a few white children, were left with very few resources. The Southern strategy marked the switch of the party's positions over the issue of race. Johnson knew what that meant, but the nation's move towards equality would provide a weapon for a certain kind of politician to rise to power. In a hotel in Tennessee, after a day spent seeing racial slurs scrawled on signs and an evening of bourbon, Johnson explained the signs to his young aide, Bill Moyers. "I'll tell you what's at the bottom of it," he said. "If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best," and he uses the word colored, so I apologize if that was a slur, "man, you won't notice you're picking his pocket. No, give him somebody to look down on, and he'll empty his pockets for you." The stage was set, with rhetoric and policy, for the rise of authoritarianism. And that is chapter 5. We're moving right along. I think I'm actually going to end it there tonight. This is a very good book. It's I realize that for some folks it might be a little like skimming the surface, but I'm actually grateful to have it be kind of start simply, I guess. I don't know. I don't know whether I'm not describing it correctly. But it seems like it's presenting it very straightforward and keeping it fairly high level. I don't know if you would, if anyone would agree with me, but that's what I would like. I just been saying. I'm gonna tell you right now, there's nothing better than a hot shower. I remember taking cold showers when I was working in Africa. Because we didn't have, like if you didn't take the first shower, you didn't get hot water because it all depended on what water was heated the most. Because it was from a tank on top of the house. So it just came down with gravity. So I don't know. I don't know what, I never seemed to hit it right then. So if you did, you could get some sun-warmed water, and it could feel pretty hot. That was great. But boy, that's my one thing. Cold showers are tough every day. Not easy, right? Well, I suppose you get used to it, don't you? You think you get used to it? It's kind of surprising that water can be cold sitting in a tank on top of a house. Near the equator. Equatorial heat is really hot. It's crazy. Like your body just is constantly shedding water. Mm-hmm. I just fall asleep to this. Okay. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're here, or that you are here. So thank you so much. I will see you hopefully tomorrow night with a gaming action. Should be hilarious. We'll see if it works. Anyway, I adore you all very much. Thank you so much. Oh my god, hot showers at the end of the day are it. They're the light. They are the way. They are the way, my children. I'll start a church of hot showers. I do like, I mean, I like a cold shower, but I'm telling you right now, it's just not the way you want to live your life. Oh my goodness. Okay, I don't want to wake anybody up, so I'm gonna be quiet and let you all drift off to sleep, perchance to dream. I hope you do. I hope you have wonderful dreams. Yeah. Me too. Me too. Me too. I'll be hoping. I'll be hoping. All right. Migraine cure. Absolutely. Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, good point. I bet you that would feel wonderful. Okay, well now I'm rethinking my cold shower criticisms. You guys are bringing some good reasons up here. So, good night. Good night. I'll see you later.